The moment Judge Gwyneth Paltrow interrupted Jonathan Roumie during the live congressional hearing, the entire atmosphere shifted. What had begun as a routine Supreme Court confirmation turned into one of the most soul-shaking confrontations Washington had ever witnessed. Paltrow assumed her polished authority would quiet the man known more for his calm presence than political heat. She couldn't have been more mistaken. As the packed hearing room fell silent, Roumie slowly rose from his seat, not with defiance, but with a weight that seemed older than the room itself. His eyes, gentle yet unwavering, met hers across the chamber. What followed left Judge Paltrow speechless and may have dismantled her path to the highest court in the land. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable story, take a moment to subscribe, because sometimes the quietest voice delivers the most earth-shaking truth, and you'll want to witness every moment of how Jonathan Roumie, with reverence and reason, brought down one of America's most celebrated judicial nominees. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room buzzed with tension beneath the marble walls. Television cameras lined every angle, capturing what was supposed to be Judge Gwyneth Paltrow's smooth ascent to the Supreme Court. But no one expected the unfolding confrontation, not between a politician and a judge, but between performance and principle. At 52, Judge Paltrow embodied what the elite establishment dreamed of: glamour wrapped in intellect. Born into privilege, she had reinvented herself as a legal icon, founder of a justice-conscious nonprofit, a darling of wellness circles, and now the White House's nominee for the highest bench in the country. Her resume glittered with prestigious degrees, high-profile clerking positions, and media appearances that sold both substance and serenity. To her supporters, Paltrow was the perfect synthesis, a woman of influence who spoke the language of empathy and law. Her brand was balance. Her persona was power dressed in pastel. Republican senators praised her clarity. Cable pundits spoke of her inevitable rise. Her confirmation seemed a formality. But Paltrow carried a flaw deeper than any resume could mask: a quiet, cultivated arrogance. Years of curated applause had convinced her that no one would dare confront her, at least not in public, and certainly not someone like Jonathan Roumie. Roumie was the last person she expected to face resistance from. He wasn't a senator. He wasn't even a political operator. He was invited as a civil voice, a representative of a national coalition of faith-based legal advocates. On paper, his role was ceremonial. In reality, it was providential. Known to millions for portraying Christ in The Chosen, Roumie had become more than an actor. He was a symbol of humility, conscience, and unflinching moral clarity. Unlike his opponent, he wasn't cloaked in legal tradition or partisan ambition. His authority came not from robes or degrees, but from the rare ability to make a room listen, truly listen. He didn't enter with the intention to destroy. But when truth calls, silence becomes betrayal. Judge Paltrow had breezed through the morning session. Republican senators offered flattering questions about her journey and vision. Democrats pushed gently on civil rights and corporate favoritism, but she responded with polished neutrality, carefully avoiding controversy. She spoke eloquently and revealed very little. Then came the moment. Senator Chuck Grassley, the committee chair, cleared his throat. The committee now recognizes Mr. Jonathan Roumie, speaking on behalf of the American Coalition for Ethical Jurisprudence. You have 30 minutes. The room stilled. Roumie stood slowly, adjusting the sleeves of his charcoal suit. He did not posture, he did not perform. He simply looked up, his gaze resting gently on Judge Paltrow. What he carried wasn't a speech, it was a reckoning. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," he began, his voice even and calm. "Judge Paltrow, congratulations on your nomination. I want to begin by honoring your accomplishments and acknowledging the remarkable story you have shared about your path to this moment." Paltrow gave a warm nod, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "It's meaningful," Roumie continued. "Your rise, your reinvention, your narrative of care." He paused just long enough for the air to shift. "But Judge, I've studied your decisions, and I must confess I'm burdened, because behind the story you tell, there's another story unfolding in your rulings, one that doesn't seem to reflect the compassion you so often speak about." The tension thickened. "I'd like to walk through a few cases," Roumie continued gently, "where your decisions have left real people, vulnerable people, unseen, unheard, and in some cases harmed." Paltrow blinked, the smile stiffened. This was not a legal ambush. It was something far more devastating. It was truth, dressed in grace. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop, not physically, but spiritually. A stillness fell that made even seasoned reporters sit up straighter. Judge Paltrow's smile tightened. Her shoulders, once relaxed, lifted in slight but noticeable tension. Jonathan Roumie gently opened the leather-bound folio he had brought to the witness table. It wasn't thick for effect. It was thick with truth. "Judge Paltrow," he said softly, his tone devoid of aggression, but heavy with conviction. "Let's begin with Rodriguez versus Miami-Dade County, a case from your time on Florida's Supreme Court." He paused just long enough for her name to echo off the marble. "You ruled against a man named Carlos Rodriguez, a janitor, 30 years of service, fired after taking too many sick days to care for his diabetic daughter. He was the only Latino worker dismissed, despite having better attendance than several white employees who remained. In your opinion, dismissed his claim as at-will employment." Several people in the gallery shifted. Civil rights advocates locked eyes across the room. Paltrow moved slightly in her seat. "Mr. Roumie," she said with a forced calm, "you understand that I cannot speak on the specifics of cases that may come before the court." "Oh, but this one won't," Roumie interrupted gently. "It's already decided. You wrote the majority opinion yourself." A quiet stir passed through the gallery. "You didn't just deny the man justice," Roumie continued. "You denied him dignity. A family lost their income, their health insurance, their hope, and you called it compliant with precedent." Judge Paltrow's expression hardened. "The law requires consistency," she replied, measured but strained. "We cannot rule based on personal sympathies." Jonathan nodded slowly. "True justice doesn't stem from sympathy, Judge. It stems from clarity of conscience." He set down the folder and reached for another, thicker, heavier. "Let's move to Thompson versus Florida Department of Education," he said. "A young teacher, Keisha Thompson, brilliant, beloved by her students, denied a promotion despite top evaluations. Internal emails labeled her as not a good cultural fit." He let the words hang in the air. "You ruled against her too, but it wasn't just your ruling. It was the standard you imposed. You wrote that proving racial bias required smoking gun evidence. In essence, you raised the bar so high that no one could reach it, not even the truth." The judge's cheeks flushed with heat. "I deeply resent the suggestion that I'm anything less than impartial," she said, voice stiff. "I'm not suggesting," Roumie said calmly, looking her in the eye. "I'm stating, based on your own words." Sensing the direction, Paltrow leaned forward, channeling the authority of a courtroom, one she no longer controlled. "Mr. Roumie," she said, lifting her hand sharply, "I need to stop you right there. This line of questioning is inappropriate and misleading. You are cherry-picking cases, twisting context." Her voice cracked slightly under pressure. "I've spent my life upholding the rule of law." But this wasn't her courtroom, and Roumie wasn't a nervous defense attorney. A collective gasp escaped the room. Senators froze. Reporters blinked. Legal clerks stopped typing. Nominees do not interrupt speakers in congressional hearings. It was more than protocol. It was sacred ground, and she had just trampled it. Roumie didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, eyes steady, and said, "Judge Paltrow, did you just interrupt a sworn witness during an official congressional proceeding?" A second silence fell, heavier than the first. Cameras zoomed in. Eyewitnesses would later say the oxygen left the room. Beads of sweat formed on Paltrow's temple. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the polished wood of the witness table. I apologize if I misspoke," she stammered. "I was simply trying to clarify." "No, Judge," Roumie said, voice now resonating with the full weight of righteous authority. "Let me clarify something for you." He leaned forward, not with aggression, but with truth. "This is not your courtroom. I am not a junior attorney pleading for grace. I am a citizen of this nation, entrusted by the people to speak truthfully and without fear." He paused, allowing his words to settle like quiet thunder. "And you, Gibanon, you are asking for a lifetime appointment to interpret the soul of our Constitution, which means your instinct to silence reveals more than your record ever could." The balance of power in the chamber had shifted, irreversibly. "Your reaction today," he continued, "tells us something profound. When questioned with care and evidence, you reach for control, not reflection. And that, Judge Paltrow, is the very opposite of what the Supreme Court demands." Paltrow sat still, blinking, jaw clenched, but Roumie wasn't finished. "If context is what you seek," he said quietly, "then allow me to offer some, the kind that might finally reveal what your confirmation hearings have concealed." With deliberate grace, Jonathan Roumie reached down and produced a sealed folder from beneath the desk. The color was neutral, but the energy it carried was unmistakable. Inside were documents that would change everything. "Judge Paltrow," he asked softly, "do you recall addressing the Federalist Society's annual dinner in Miami 3 years ago?" Her expression drained of color. She remembered, and she knew what was coming next. She knew exactly what was coming, but there was no escape. "I speak at many legal events," Judge Gwyneth Paltrow said, attempting a composed tone, but even her polished delivery trembled. "Perhaps you're referring to—" "This wasn't just any event," Jonathan Roumie interrupted softly, though his voice now carried the weight of a bell tolling in a quiet chapel. "This was a private dinner attended by major donors, corporate lobbyists, and conservative power brokers. You spoke freely, Judge, because you thought no one from outside that circle would ever hear you." He held up a small silver recording device. "We have the full audio of your remarks that evening, Judge Paltrow. Would you like to explain, or shall I play it for the committee, why you told that exclusive audience that civil rights laws have gone too far and that responsible judges like yourself must begin reversing them?" A sonic tremor seemed to pass through the room. The gallery gasped. The tension snapped into something electric. Democratic senators leaned in. Republican senators froze. Staffers exchanged panicked looks. Judge Paltrow's practiced facade began to fracture. Her hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "Mr. Roumie," she said carefully, "remarks at private events can often be misinterpreted, especially when taken out of context." "There is no context," Roumie replied gently, "that makes this acceptable. But let's allow your own words to speak for themselves." He turned and nodded once toward the technical staff. The speakers in the hearing room crackled to life. A voice, smooth, unmistakably Gwyneth Paltrow's, filled the chamber. The civil rights movement achieved its noble goals long ago, but now the pendulum has swung too far. What we're seeing is reverse discrimination, masquerading as social justice. Responsible judges, judges like us, need to bring balance back before more qualified Americans are left behind. And yes, I mean qualified white Americans passed over for less qualified minorities. The oxygen vanished from the room. No one moved, no one breathed. But the audio continued. "The Rodriguez case? That was an easy decision. These discrimination claims, they're often manipulative. If I make it to a higher court, and I will, I intend to begin scaling back many of these so-called protections. The Constitution was never meant to be bent for emotional activism." Word by word, the myth unraveled. Each sentence shattered another piece of her carefully curated image. And when the final sentence echoed into silence, Judge Paltrow was no longer composed. She was exposed. Jonathan waited. Let the echo settle. Let the truth find its footing. Then he said calmly with sacred stillness, "Judge Paltrow, you just heard your own voice, expressing sentiments that directly contradict your sworn testimony to this committee. You claimed you were committed to equal justice, that your rulings were based solely on precedent." He leaned forward. His next words were not loud, but they rang like a bell in a cathedral. "You lied to us." The words struck like thunder beneath marble ceilings. Judge Paltrow opened her mouth, but only scattered syllables emerged. That recording, I never meant—" "Judge," Roumie interrupted with unwavering clarity, "the room just heard your exact words. Are you now suggesting the recording is fabricated? Are you accusing this committee, or perhaps the American people, of conspiracy?" Her lips parted again, but no defense came, only silence. And then, the breaking point. Under the unbearable weight of truth, the mask finally shattered. "You people always twist everything," Paltrow burst out, her voice rising in panic. "You create discrimination where there is none. You weaponize pain. I've been fair my entire life, but nothing is ever enough for you people." She didn't realize what she'd said, but everyone else did. The phrase, "you people," hung in the air like poison. Across the gallery, gasps turned to stunned silence. No one needed to interpret what had just happened. Gwyneth Paltrow's nomination was over. She had confirmed, more clearly than anyone else could have, exactly who she was. Roumie remained perfectly still. When her outburst ended, he simply looked at her, not with vengeance, but with something more piercing, disappointment. "Thank you, Judge Paltrow," he said quietly, "for finally showing the country who you really are. The mask has fallen, the robe is gone, and what's left is prejudice, cloaked in legalese." He calmly gathered his document. "Mr. Chairman," Roumie said as he stood, voice composed yet firm, "I have no further questions for this nominee. She has disqualified herself far more thoroughly than any examination ever could. The room erupted into chaos. Democratic senators sat stunned, still absorbing the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Republican senators huddled together, whispering furiously, already calculating the fallout. Civil rights advocates, some tearful, some shaking, looked at each other with a mixture of disbelief and relief. Paltrow sat alone, her career disintegrating in real time. Her team flanked her, whispering, panicking, but there was nothing left to salvage. Chairman Grassley pounded his gavel. "The committee will recess for 30 minutes, he declared, voice tight, hands trembling. But everyone in the room knew the truth. This recess wasn't temporary. This nomination was over. Within minutes, the internet was on fire. Paltrow meltdown, Roumie reckoning, #you people. The audio clip raced across social media. Legal experts called it the most catastrophic hearing failure in modern history. CNN interrupted programming. Even Fox News struggled to offer defense. By 4:17 p.m., the first domino fell. Senator Susan Collins issued a statement. "After reviewing today's hearing and the audio in question, I can no longer in good conscience support Judge Paltrow's nomination." Her remarks reflect a dangerous view of equal justice. More senators followed. The confirmation collapsed in hours. But the impact would echo for years. Within minutes, Senators Lisa Murkowski and Mitt Romney issued brief but decisive statements. They could no longer support Judge Paltrow's nomination. It was over, but the collapse of one candidacy was just the beginning. Behind closed doors, Republican leadership was in freefall. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who had personally shepherded Paltrow through the vetting process, called an emergency meeting with his caucus. The atmosphere in the room was dark. "This isn't just one failed nomination," McConnell said, grim and unsparing. "That recording has cracked the facade. It casts doubt on every nominee we've ever advanced. It validates every accusation the other side has made about our judicial playbook." The truth was now undeniable. For decades, they had carefully crafted nominees to look neutral while quietly advancing a deeply ideological agenda. Paltrow's voice, her own words, had exposed the machinery. Senator Ted Cruz slammed his fist on the table. "How did we miss this?" he shouted. "How does something this explosive slip through our process? Our entire vetting system just imploded." Others murmured in agreement. Senator Lindsey Graham, chair of the Judiciary Committee, sat pale, holding a printed transcript. "We're not just losing this confirmation," he said softly. "We're losing credibility for all future nominees. That man, Roumie, he changed the rules in under 30 minutes, and we weren't ready. The old tactics, vague answers, safe language, legal ambiguity, were dead. Jonathan Roumie had buried them under something far more enduring: moral clarity." Across town, conservative legal organizations scrambled to do damage control. The Federalist Society removed Paltrow's name from their website. Speaking engagements were canceled. PR statements were drafted and redrafted, but the narrative had already escaped. And at the center of it all stood a man who never raised his voice. Jonathan Roumie's appearance at the hearing was supposed to be ceremonial, a gentle nod to bipartisan inclusion. Instead, it became a moment of national reckoning. His ability to remain composed, precise, and unwavering in the face of elitist dismissal transformed him from a quiet guest into a symbol of truth in American political life. Within hours, hashtags trended across platforms. #Thank you, Jonathan. #Truth over titles. #you people clips of his confrontation were watched over 12 million times in the first day. Commentators across ideological lines, from CNN to even segments on Fox, acknowledged the power of the moment, not because it was sensational, but because it was authentic. House Speaker Hakeem Jeffries called Roumie personally. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer invited him to a private strategy meeting. Even prominent presidential campaign managers reached out, some wondering if Roumie might one day be more than just a guest witness, perhaps a national figure of conscience. He declined most interviews. What praise he received, he deflected. "This wasn't about me," Roumie said in a brief statement. "It was about truth, and truth belongs to the people." But his influence could not be denied. Television producers flooded his office. Sunday political shows wanted him as their headline guest. Late-night hosts dedicated entire monologues to his speech. Saturday Night Live began rehearsing sketches the very next day. Behind the scenes, the journalists traced the origins of the damning recording. What they found was even more powerful than the hearing itself. The voice memo had come from a young Latino waiter, just 22 at the time, working at the exclusive Federalist Society dinner. He had heard Paltrow's remarks with horror. Quietly, he had recorded the entire speech on his phone, and for 3 years he waited for the moment when telling the truth would finally mean something. When Paltrow's nomination was announced, he contacted a civil rights group. They vetted him, then connected him, not with a headline-hunting activist, but with Jonathan Roumie's team. They worked quietly for weeks, verifying every detail. No leaks, no theatrics, just integrity. This proves one thing, Roumie later said in an interview. Democracy doesn't just live in chambers and courtrooms. It breathes through people, ordinary people, with courage. The aftershocks were immediate. Legal scholars began revisiting the rulings of conservative judges across the country, combing through patterns once dismissed as coincidence. The American Bar Association issued a public apology, acknowledging their vetting failures. They began revising their entire rating framework. The Senate Judiciary Committee, still reeling, instituted a new rule: full disclosure of all private speeches, remarks, and event affiliations. They called it the Paltrow Rule, but among the most profound reactions came from the nation's law schools. Harvard Law announced a new course, Judicial Accountability in the Digital Age, using Roumie's cross-examination as its first case study. Yale invited him to deliver their annual Constitution Day lecture, making him the first non-politician, non-judge, and youngest public figure to do so. The Federal Bar Association convened an emergency ethics panel. Judges who had once assumed their private beliefs were safe behind closed doors were now under scrutiny. The age of judicial mystique had been pierced, and at the heart of it all stood one quiet man. Not a politician, not a judge, not a pundit, but a citizen. A citizen who stood and asked, with humility and conviction, the one question powerful people fear most: what do you truly believe when no one is watching? In the days that followed, legal ethics scholars across the country debated whether Judge Paltrow's remarks constituted not just bias, but judicial misconduct worthy of formal investigation. The implications were chilling. Her words had not only ended her own aspirations, they had cast a shadow over the entire federal bench. Dozens of sitting judges, once considered untouchable, were now under renewed scrutiny. The illusion of impartiality, once preserved by robes and carefully worded statements, had been shattered by a single recording and one man's unwavering insistence on truth. But for the people most affected by her decisions, this moment was not just political. It was personal. It was deliverance. Carlos Rodriguez, the janitor whose discrimination case had been dismissed by Paltrow, watched the hearing replay from his new job in a maintenance team. Tears streamed down his face. "I knew she was wrong," he told reporters, "but I thought no one would ever believe a janitor over a judge." Jonathan Roumie proved that truth is greater than titles. In Florida, Keisha Thompson, the teacher denied promotion, stood before her students and wept, this time in victory. "Today," she said, "my students saw that standing up for what's right actually works." Judge Paltrow told them their dreams didn't matter because of their skin color. Mr. Roumie told them otherwise, and the world listened. Across the country, prayer vigils, town halls, and rallies were held, from churches in Dallas to school yards in Miami's Little Havana, Paltrow's own neighborhood. Activists from every background praised Roumie for doing what no senator, judge, or journalist had done. "He reminded us," said Maria Santos, a Latino organizer, "that justice belongs to all, not just the polished and powerful." Paltrow forgot where she came from. Jonathan Roumie didn't. Political analysts scrambled for precedent. The closest comparison was Robert Bork's failed nomination in 1987, but even that had taken weeks. Roumie's questioning had dismantled a decades-long judicial strategy in less than an hour. CNN's senior legal analyst called it the most effective act of public accountability in a generation. Law schools across the country made the hearing required viewing, not just for its legal content, but for what it taught about preparation, courage, and conscience. Harvard Law launched a course, Truth versus Power, Judicial Vetting in the 21st Century. Yale invited Roumie to give the Constitution Day address, the first actor and faith leader ever to receive that honor. Even the Federal Bar Association launched an emergency ethics panel to review whether private prejudice remarks could warrant censure or removal from the bench. But the transformation went beyond institutions. President Trump, infuriated by the collapse of his prize nominee, lashed out on social media, blaming radical actors, deep state recordings, and fake controversy. Behind the scenes, aides were fired. Vetting protocols were overhauled. Staffers whispered that Roumie had not only sunk a nomination, but exposed the fragility of an entire judicial pipeline. Polling revealed a seismic shift. For the first time in decades, a majority of Americans across party lines now favored rigorous, truth-based interrogation of judicial nominees. The age of performative deference was gone. The political effect rippled across the midterms. Democratic candidates who had struggled to mobilize young voters now found their message: truth, courage, and moral clarity. But Republican candidates were forced to answer, would your nominee pass the Roumie test? Within months, Jonathan Roumie's role in the hearing had elevated him far beyond public admiration. He was appointed to an ethics advisory council in the House Judiciary Committee. Progressive leaders invited him to speak at national conventions. Grassroots movements across the country quoted his words, not as sound bites, but as guiding principles. The truth doesn't shout, Roumie had said in his closing remarks. It waits, and then it stands. And when it stands, even the proudest towers crumble. The American people had seen what quiet courage looked like, and they weren't going back. As the one-year anniversary of the hearing approached, Roumie was asked to reflect in a nationally broadcast town hall. He stood calmly, hands folded, and said, Judge Paltrow believed titles could silence truth. But in this country, in the country my grandparents came to with empty hands and full hearts, truth speaks louder than power, and it always will. The hearing was no longer a political footnote. It had become a blueprint for how democracy should work, and what happens when conscience walks into the room and refuses to back down. When powerful people abuse their platforms, when institutions protect the privileged over the honest, when the law is manipulated to crush those without a voice. Sometimes all it takes is one person with the courage to ask the right question. Jonathan Roumie did exactly that, and history will remember it. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth can still rise above power, and that one voice, spoken with conviction, can change everything, then this is just the beginning. Subscribe to this channel for more real, raw, and inspiring stories where courage meets consequence. Because in a world full of noise, we tell the stories that matter. Hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who still believes that justice is worth fighting for. And drop a comment, because your voice is part of this story too. Thank you for watching. Stay brave, stay grounded, and stay awake.